In April 2001, as the global aviation industry was still reeling from a decade of brutal competition between Airbus and Boeing, a brand new aircraft lifted from Toulouse for the very first time. It was 75.36 meters long, the longest passenger airline in the world. 4 Rolls-Royce Trent 500 engines hung beneath a wing designed for oceanic endurance. Engineers called it the future of long-haul flying. Pilots called it elegant. This was supposed to be the aircraft that gave Airbus a true long-haul flagship. Instead, it became one of the most awkward reminders that even a brilliant aircraft can arrive at exactly the wrong time. For 2 decades since, the airline industry has accepted a painful truth about the A340-600. 4 engines lost, 2 engines won. The arithmetic always wins. In October 2026, Lufthansa is scheduled to operate the final commercial passenger flight of an A340-600 that will close the book on one of the most questionable wide-body programs Airbus ever launched. But here's what makes no sense. Airbus delivered just 97 A340-600s across the entire production run. Boeing delivered over 800 of the rival 777-300ER. The A340-600 didn't lose a battle. It was erased from the marketplace. Yet, every Airbus executive, every aerospace analyst, every long-haul airline strategist still studies what happened to this aircraft with unusual intensity. So, how can an aircraft that flew over hundreds of millions of passengers with 0 fatalities end up as the plane Airbus wants to forget? To understand why Airbus bet so much on the A340-600, we need to understand why this aircraft was considered essential in the late 1990s. Airbus had a structural problem. The original A340-200 and A340-300 were useful machines, but they were not massive. They couldn't compete with the Boeing 747-400 on capacity. They couldn't match the emerging Boeing 777-200ER on efficiency. They were also underpowered. Airbus needed a bigger long-haul aircraft, and quickly, something to bridge the gap, something that could carry around 380 passengers in a 3-class cabin across oceans on routes where the 747 reigned supreme. The regulatory environment of the 1990s was unforgiving. Twin-engine aircraft remained restricted by ETOPS rules, regulations dictating how far twin jets could fly from emergency diversion airports. 4-engine aircraft were exempt. They flew the direct routes, the polar routes, the remote oceanic crossings. Aircraft that could fly the most efficient routes had to have 4 engines. Aircraft that had 4 engines burned more fuel. The trade-off seemed permanent. Airlines adapted by building long-haul networks around quadjets. Carriers built premium identities around the reassurance of 4 engines humming over distant oceans. On December 8, 1997, Airbus officially launched the A340-600 with around 100 commitments, worth approximately $3 billion. The goal was to capture half of the forecast 1,500 sales in its category through 2010. Then, in August 2002, Virgin Atlantic operated the first commercial A340-600 flight from London Heathrow to New York JFK. On paper, the A340-600 looked like Airbus had stretched its way into the top tier of long-haul flying. The early years were genuinely promising. The A340-600 had a huge cabin. It had a long range, approximately 14,000 kilometers, a bit more with the high gross weight variant that Airbus introduced in 2005. It had 4-engine reliability that airline marketing departments loved. Airbus weaponized this advantage. At the 2002 Farnborough Air Show, Airbus erected a billboard that became infamous in aviation circles. A340, 4 engines, 4 long-haul. For a brief moment, the strategy worked. Lufthansa used the A340-600 heavily on premium long-haul routes from Frankfurt and Munich. Iberia deployed it on demanding Latin American routes from Madrid. Thai Airways took delivery of 6 units to fly from Bangkok. Qatar Airways ordered 10 units, beginning in September 2006, using them to debut a new corporate livery. The aircraft had prestige, it looked premium, it had that global flagship feel that justified expensive business class fares and helped airlines compete with the Boeing 747 without buying into the 747's complex upper deck architecture. Before the A340-600 even entered service, everything had changed. The Boeing 777-300ER entered the market with a huge range, huge capacity, and only 2 engines. The 777-300ER could do almost everything the A340-600 could do, but with dramatically better economics. Airlines care about cost per seat, fuel burn, maintenance, reliability, and cargo. On every single one of those metrics, the 777-300ER won. The A340-600 did not lose because it could not fly far enough. It lost because the 777 could fly almost as far with half the engines. But the deeper problem wasn't simply that the 777-300ER existed. It was that the entire regulatory environment that had justified 4 engines in the first place was collapsing. By the late 1990s, jet engine reliability had reached unprecedented levels. Aviation authorities extended ETOPS limits to 240 minutes, then 330 minutes, and eventually 370 minutes. Suddenly, 4 engines no longer meant unique safety. Twin jets could fly the same routes, once reserved for 3 or 4 engine aircraft. The A340-600 was built for a world where 4 engines meant safety. It entered a world where 4 engines meant extra costs. The A340-600's timing was brutal. As fuel prices rose sharply through the 2000s, airlines became obsessed with fuel efficiency. The numbers were unforgiving. According to industry analysis, the A340-600 burned approximately 12% more fuel per trip than the 777-300ER overall. On a per-seat basis, the penalty climbed even higher. The A340-600 was not killed by one design flaw, it was killed by economics. To attract buyers, Airbus aggressively discounted the aircraft. But the savings gained on the sticker price of the A340-600 were frequently consumed by excess fuel costs in less than a year of typical operations. For airlines operating ultra-long routes, fuel could make or break profitability. The A340-600 became increasingly vulnerable as kerosene became more expensive in the 2000s. The A340-600 was also a heavy aircraft. It had a long fuselage, a large wing, 4 engines, heavily reinforced landing gear, and enormous long-haul fuel capacity. That gave it impressive capability. But capability comes at a cost. Its maximum takeoff weight reached 380,000 kilograms in the high gross weight variant. If an airline could not fill it with enough high-yield passengers and cargo, the economics became painful very quickly. The aircraft needed the right route, the right demand, and the right fuel environment. The Boeing 777 was simply more flexible across more market conditions. The A340-600 was magnificent when full. The problem was what happened when it wasn't. Long-haul widebodies do not make money only from passengers. Belly cargo matters enormously to airline profitability. The 777-300ER was devastatingly strong on cargo. It could carry between 28 and 30 tons of freight in its lower hold, with a maximum payload roughly 11,300 pounds higher than the A340-600. The 777 did not just carry passengers efficiently, it carried the profit underneath them. The A340-600's combination of heavy structural weight, 4 massive engines, and high fuel needs forced painful payload range trade-offs on demanding sectors. On cargo-heavy long-haul markets, the 777 was simply impossible to beat. The A340-600 was not a useless aircraft, it was a useful aircraft that became increasingly hard to justify. Lufthansa used it heavily and kept it longer than many expected. the German flag carrier, deployed the A340-600 on premium long-haul routes, where its 8-seat first-class cabin generated exceptional yields. Virgin Atlantic made it part of its long-haul identity for nearly 2 decades before retiring its fleet in 2020 in favor of more efficient Boeing 787s and Airbus A350s. Iberia used it extensively for Latin America connections from Madrid. South African Airways used it for demanding long-haul routes from Johannesburg. Thai Airways operated it on premium long-haul sectors. So this story is not about a failed aircraft. The A340-600 was capable and sometimes ideally suited to specific operational requirements, but the broader market moved away from it with brutal speed. South African Airways serves as the perfect case study for the aircraft's operational necessity and its financial vulnerability. Johannesburg's OR Tambo International Airport sits at an elevation of 5,500 feet and frequently experiences high temperatures, or as is known in the industry, hot and high. Thin air means less lift over the wings and less oxygen for engine combustion. On takeoff from Johannesburg on a hot afternoon, aircraft lose significant performance margins. 4 engines and long range give the A340-600 a unique role on these demanding routes. But SAA also suffered from high operating costs and persistent financial problems. Financial records indicate the airline's operations incurred staggering annual deficits. The A340-600 could solve route performance problems, but solving performance is not the same as solving profitability. The darkest moment in the A340-600's history occurred before an aircraft even left the ground. On November 15, 2007, a brand new A340-600 destined for Etihad Airways was undergoing ground engine tests at the Airbus facility in Toulouse, France. Technicians powered all 4 Trent 500 engines to near maximum thrust. Crucially, the wheels were left unchoked. Overwhelmed by 56,000 pounds of thrust per engine, the parking brake failed to hold the aircraft. The jet broke loose and accelerated to 31 knots in just 7 seconds. The technicians focused entirely on the brakes and failed to throttle back the engines. The 300-ton airliner slammed into a concrete blast deflection wall, tearing open the forward fuselage and driving the cockpit through to the other side. 5 people were injured, 4 seriously. The aircraft was completely written off before logging a single commercial flight hour. It was a small story in the broader collapse of the A340-600 program, but it became symbolic. Even on the ground, the aircraft seemed to struggle against forces it couldn't overcome. Virgin Atlantic's A340-600s were iconic. Long, elegant 4-engine aircraft suited Virgin's glamour brand. Sir Richard Branson proudly championed the aircraft's grand scale. But Virgin later moved toward more efficient twinjets like the 787 and A350. The airline officially retired its last A340-600s in 2020. The A340-600 looked perfect in Virgin colors, but airline economics do not care how good a plane looks. Lufthansa's story is more nuanced. The carrier kept the A340-600 in service far longer than most observers predicted, partly because of fleet logistics and partly because of an unexpected post-pandemic dynamic. Following COVID-19, Lufthansa faced a severe shortage of new aircraft, while awaiting delayed deliveries of newer Airbus and Boeing jets. In 2021 and 2022, the airline reactivated 5 grounded A340-600s, specifically to capture surging premium demand on lucrative corridors from Munich and Frankfurt. The airline accepted the higher fuel burn because the alternative was lost premium revenue. Even an obsolete aircraft holds value when it's the only available platform for an 8-seat first-class cabin. But the broader trend remained clear. Delivery delays of Boeing 787s forced Lufthansa to postpone the A340-600 retirement from late 2025 to late 2026. The final scheduled commercial passenger flight is now planned for October 2026. You see, Airbus did not keep pushing the A340 family forever. The A380 became the flagship bet for very large aircraft. The A350 became the real successor for efficient long-haul twin-engine flying. The A340-600 became squeezed from both sides, too small and inefficient compared to the A380 for prestige trunk routes, too thirsty compared to the A350 and 777 for everything else. In 2006, Airbus explored an enhanced A340 variant, promising 8 to 9% lower per-seat fuel burn using newer engines, aiming to close the gap with the 777. It never entered production. Production of the A340 family officially ended in November 2011. Airbus delivered 377 A340s. In total, just 97 were the 600 variant. The A350 is what happened when Airbus stopped defending 4 engines and started beating Boeing at its own game. The A350-1000 offered better fuel efficiency per seat compared to the A340-600. Twin engines, composite structure, lower fuel burn, long range, a better cabin, strong cargo, lower maintenance burden. The A340-600 represented old Airbus long-haul thinking. The A350 represented the future. This makes the A340-600 feel like a bridge aircraft. Too modern to be classic, too old school to survive in the twin-jet era. Most people studying the A340-600 today aren't focused on its specifications, they're focused on what its failure revealed about the speed of paradigm shifts. The aircraft was conceived in an era where 4 engines meant access to routes twins couldn't fly. By the time it entered service, that advantage was already disappearing. By the time it had been in service for 5 years, that advantage was gone entirely. Yet, every aircraft manufacturer must now account for what the A340-600 demonstrated. Regulatory environments shift faster than aircraft development cycles. Engine reliability improves faster than airframe depreciation. Fuel prices move faster than fleet planning assumptions. The assumption that physical capability equals commercial success is no longer absolute. Airlines built networks on the convenience of 4-engine flexibility. That flexibility became less valuable when twin jets could fly the same routes for dramatically less money. As composite structures, advanced engines, and ETOPS regulations continue evolving, more aircraft categories become vulnerable to similar disruption. The wide bodies that require specific operational profiles today might not require them tomorrow. The A340-600 is not entirely disappearing. The physical airframes are taking on unexpected second lives precisely because their acquisition cost has collapsed. UK-based European Cargo is executing a major passenger-to-freighter conversion program, retired A340-600s. After receiving EASA certification in 2002, the company was converting up to 10 aircraft into specialized freighters. But on June 3rd, European Cargo entered administration, putting the project to bed. In theory, the extremely low capital cost of acquiring retired airframes offsets the fuel inefficiency of 4 engines. Whether any airlines will actually use converted frames remains to be seen. The A340-600 has also become valuable in aviation markets, barred from purchasing new aircraft. Iran-based Mahan Air acquired at least 7 A340-600s in 2015 through a complex network involving Iraqi conduit Al Nasser Airlines and front companies. By traditional metrics, the A340-600 was a clear failure. Just 97 deliveries against the rival 777's 800 plus. A production run terminated after barely a decade. But the A340-600 is promising something different in retrospect. Strategic lessons can be disproportionate to commercial outcomes. The A340-600 doesn't represent a manufacturing mistake. Airbus engineers built exactly what airlines requested in the late 1990s. The aircraft was magnificent on demanding hot and high routes. It carried over hundreds of millions of passengers with 0 fatalities. But the A340-600 created something else too. a permanent case study in what happens when an aircraft enters service during a regulatory and technological inflection point. For certain airlines on certain routes, the A340-600 will always be remembered fondly. Virgin Atlantic crews speak of it with affection. Lufthansa kept it flying for decades. Pilots loved the four-engine reliability. Passengers loved the cabin size. In 1997, Airbus launched the A340-600 because there was no alternative. Twin-engine technology hadn't matured. ETOPS rules hadn't relaxed. Fuel was relatively cheap. The 747 dominated the high-capacity long-haul market with no serious competition. The A340-600 was a rational response to a specific moment in aviation history. 2 decades later, the aircraft represents the opposite of what it was meant to be. Not a flagship, not a competitor to the 747, not the future of long-haul travel. Instead, an awkward reminder that markets shift faster than aircraft programs.